Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's event in collaboration with Tamizdat, CoveyLaw, and the National Independent Venue Association. My name is Willie Santiago, and I am the Program Specialist for the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a fair-skinned Hispanic person with short, brown, medium-length, wavy brown hair, brown eyes, and I am wearing a maroon jacket over a pink shirt. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that APAP is located in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway, the Anacostan, and Pamunkey people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And I would like to pay my respect to the elders, both past, present, and future. For today's webinar, closed captioning is available, and we are joined today by ASL interpreters Pamela Oswald and Priscilla McDaniel. Please note today's gathering is in Zoom's webinar format, as we received an overwhelming registration number. We received several questions in advance as a part of the webinar registration process, and it has informed today's structure. If you have additional questions during today's session, please add them to the Q&A. We will be monitoring it throughout the session to determine if any questions are to be answered live. I will now turn things over to Matthew Covey.
Thank you, Willie. I appreciate it. And thank you to APAP and to NIVA for working with us to put together this timely webinar. My name is Matthew Covey. I'm a middle-aged white man with a beard, short hair, and I'm wearing a blue and white striped shirt. I am the executive director of Tamizdat, which is a nonprofit committed to international artist mobility, and I am the founder of CoveyLaw, which is a Brooklyn-based law firm serving the legal needs of the international cultural sector. My pronouns are he and him. As Willie suggested, when people registered, they put in questions that they had that they would like the panel to answer. This panel is principally talking about questions about venue management. If you are running a venue, a performing arts venue, how to deal with issues that arise around immigration enforcement. But there were a fair number of questions. And there's a lot going on right now in the world of artist visas, which is what most people know me as, the person who works on artist visas. So quick, dirty summary. USCIS regular processing times have gone from bad to worse. This affects anybody who needs a PRO visa or any other petition-based visa. If you need a visa in less than 6 months, pretty much everybody has to be prepared to pay the $2,805 premium processing fee, because no matter how far in advance you're planning, we're seeing petitions that are taking as long as a year to process with regular processing, which is difficult because you can't file more than a year before the artist needs to get here. And so when they're taking 13 months to process and you can't file more than 12 months in advance, nobody knows how that's supposed to work, but it definitely isn't working very well. So premium processing is pretty much necessary right now. I hate to say that, but it's the way it is. Visa interview appointment times for artists getting visas at embassies around the world are increasing. Those are becoming harder and slower to get. This has gotten worse because of extreme vetting is slowing down the processes of issuing visas, especially for students, and that's affecting the whole ecosystem. Also, starting September 2nd, the Department of State has announced that people are no longer going to be able to get a waiver of their interview, and that's also, we're expecting, going to slow things down. So leaving more time for artists to get visas issued at embassies is something that you're going to have to be preparing for. That's going to affect everybody except Canadians, of course, who don't actually need visas. They just need the work authorization. With the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there were a number of mentions about that related to visas, and there have been a lot of questions about how those are going to affect artists coming into the U.S. There is a ESTA fee increase. Supposedly, this doesn't affect anyone yet because we don't know if or when it will happen. If it happens, it will probably be from $21 to $40, but we don't know when. There's also a thing that I've gotten a bunch of questions about, an I-94 fee increase. This also has not been enacted yet. It will be going from $6 to $24 if it happens, or when it happens. We don't have any idea. Congress has approved it, but they haven't done anything about it. There are also questions about a visa integrity fee. This is a fee that they're talking about charging everybody who enters on a visa, and then they give it back when you leave, a kind of like a bond of some sort. This also doesn't affect anyone yet. Congress has approved it, but the US government hasn't figured out any way to do that. Speaking personally, I can't imagine how they're going to actually make that work. But it's been approved and it could happen theoretically. There's also an actual visa bond pilot program, which will be starting on August 20th, which is a much higher bond that certain individuals from certain countries will have to pay. The government will hold that money until they leave and leave compliantly. Those amounts are much higher, but they only affect people from very specific countries. People traveling right now on passports from Malawi and Zambia are the only two countries affected by that. I'm getting questions from people from all over the world, but those are the only two countries that have been identified. In addition to that, there have been a bunch of little changes that are very country specific. Additional little fees from if you're coming from this country, additional changes. Your visa can only allow you to enter once from another country. I would recommend anybody who wants details on this to check out Tamizdat's website, where we have a new sort of lengthy explanation of all of this posted as a news item, and that goes into the country specific details. Besides these changes and the obvious effects of the Trump travel bans for individuals from certain countries, so besides some potential fees, some terrible delays, everything is kind of sort of functioning more or less the way it normally does, which is not particularly well, but it is happening. We are getting visas for artists. And we are very busy because despite many reasons why people might be canceling tours, and many people are canceling tours, we are still seeing a lot of tours happening, which is good news for our sector. So that's the update on visas. With that, I would like to turn to the primary topic of this session, which is to talk about venues and immigration enforcement. I'm really excited to have been able to pull together an excellent panel of experts. The origin of this panel came about a couple of months ago when I was asked by Shira Gans and the mayor's office of New York to talk about how immigration is impacting the New York nightlife situation. And I was like, oh, I got to look for whoever's handling immigration issues for venues. And as I looked around, I discovered that while there were a handful of venues that had done some very good work for themselves, there had been no public discussion, as far as I could find, in the live arts sector to talk about how venues should respond to this. So I started digging around to see who'd done good work, and I was really pleased to discover that New York City Center has a very good plan and has done very good training with their staff about how to manage enforcement, largely through the work of Julie Grube, who's on our panel here, who's the COO of City Center, and Bruce Buchanan, who is the attorney who prepared those documents for them and prepared that training. So I'm just going to go through. So Bruce is the senior counsel for the San Francisco-based law firm Littler Mendelson, where his practice is at the nexus of labor law and immigration law. Julie is the vice president and chief operating officer at New York City Center, a midtown performing arts center with a capacity of over 2,200, which is a multidisciplinary space for the arts in theater, dance, and music. Also joining us is Rex Chen, a supervising immigration lawyer at Latino Justice, PRLDEF, which is the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, which was founded in 1972. Latino Justice is a national nonprofit that uses and challenges laws to create a more just and equitable society. And also joining us is Sarah Rosen, who's the senior director of human resources at the Public Theater, which includes the Public Theater itself, as well as Joe's Pub, music venue, and the Delacorte Theater in Central Park, which houses Shakespeare in the Park, as well as the Public Theater's mobile unit, which performs at New York City Public Parks. You can kind of see what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to pull together a variety of different kinds of venues that face different kinds of challenges when it comes to how they are placed within the fabric of a city, of a community. So with Bruce, Rex, Julie, Sarah, I'm going to dive in and ask each of you your first questions. Each of you has one, and then we're going to get sort of mix it up questions later. But as I do, please please feel free to give a short physical description of yourself as you get your first question, and also please feel free to state your pronouns with that first question. Many venues are concerned that they may encounter immigration enforcement at their venue or during an event. In talking with you, in the preparation for this panel, you all agreed that's important for venue leadership and staff to have a plan in place so that all staff know what they should do in the event of immigration enforcement. Throughout the webinar, I want us all to keep in mind that we're concerned about the risks faced by staff at venues, by the artists who are performing at venues, and by the audiences who are attending. But we also have to keep in mind the institutional risks faced by our venues. I think that's one of the ones that's sort of hardest to wrap our heads around as we work on this. In any event, having a plan is critical for keeping our institutions, our staff, and our audiences and our contracted artists safe. So that's largely what we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to start by talking about the specifics of enforcement and to help our community better understand exactly what the different kinds of enforcement that a venue could experience might be. My understanding is that enforcement officials could show up at your venue to do a variety of different things. They could be there to issue a notice of inspection. This is like an I-9 audit. They could conduct a raid using a judicial search warrant, or they could seek to detain an employee using an administrative warrant. So Julie, I'd like to start with you. As the COO of New York City Center, what kinds of situations have you and your team prepared for?
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. I'm Julie Grube. My pronouns are she, her. I am a fair-skinned, middle-aged woman with a pixie black haircut and glasses with a green blouse. Again, thank you for having me. Really what the process that we went through is we realized in order to best prepare, we really needed to better understand what ICE's purpose might be in coming to City Center. Do they only come to arrest someone? When are we legally required to let them into our building? We really needed to have some education in this area. And so in exploring this specifically with counsel, Bruce and Margaret, we realized that we needed to prepare for those three specific scenarios that you had outlined just a few seconds ago. The first one being ICE comes and they are here for a notice of inspection and they want to audit our I-9 documents that everyone fills out when they are first hired to work at an institution. Two, they might have an administrative warrant issued by the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to detain an individual. And three, they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge for the arrest of an individual and or to search a location. And so even just grasping all of that was a lot for us to kind of wrap our heads around and start to think about, well, what do we need to do to prepare? So we developed procedures for those three specific scenarios. And as we learned in working with counsel, the first two scenarios, that I-9 audit and the administrative warrant, ICE is not allowed into public spaces unless consent is given by the employer or the business owner. But if they have the judicial warrant, they have the legal authority to search the areas that are listed in the warrant. So we had to make an institutional decision, which was we decided not to allow ICE beyond our public spaces unless we were legally required to do so with that judicial warrant. And we had to think about, well, what exactly are our public spaces? How do we define those? And through internal conversations and on the advice of counsel, we established that, okay, our box office lobby, that's a public space. The general public can come in to purchase tickets, but to actually cross into the theater, they need a ticket in order to be able to access those spaces. So those spaces are non-public spaces. We separately have an office tower that houses all of our administrative offices, our studios. We also have tenants that rent some of our office spaces, like some medical professionals. And so we also had to establish, okay, that security lobby that someone walks into, that is a public space, but they need to have a business purpose to essentially enter an elevator to go to anywhere else, the non-public spaces of our building. And so each of those scenarios required a very different approach. So we created unique procedures for each type of visit.
Thank you, Julie. I was struggling to get off mute there.
It's okay.
That's really helpful, and I think it helps frame kind of the most basic level of how to put together a plan. Um, Specifically for a kind of venue like yours. Sarah, while the public theater's concerns for the primary theater location are probably similar to city centers, you also run Shakespeare in the Park at the Delacorte Theater in Central Park, and you have a mobile unit that performs at parks around the city. What kind of situations have you and your team prepared for?
First of all, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Sarah Rosen. I'm the HR director at the Public Theater. My pronouns are she, her. I am a middle-aged, fair-skinned woman with brown hair, brown eyes, brown glasses, and I'm wearing a red shirt and a beige cardigan over it. So many of the things that Julie talked about are the framing references that we have used for our spaces as well. Certainly, our downtown theater has so many of those markers that that she was describing. We also have, and I think Julie, this may be slightly different. We actually, our lobby is a public space that's designated a public space by the city of New York, and actually has been. We have a number of areas where it's almost like a park in terms of its designation. So we have those blurred lines about, sort of where the public space starts and stops in the physical location downtown as well. But certainly when we go into the parks, we are dealing with two different situations. We have our newly reopened Delacorte Theater in the middle of Central Park, which is our building, and we have defined public spaces and staff designations and jurisdictions around that building. And then we have a situation like the mobile unit where we go into other spaces. So let me start with that one. When we are going into other spaces, we are collaborating directly with those other spaces, whether it be a schoolyard or a community center or an outside part of a park where we need to deal with New York City Parks and Rec. We are following their protocols very, very closely, or learning about their protocols together, so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page. And so far there haven't necessarily been differences in approach. We are just thinking about different defined audiences, and our audiences are, the actual patrons to the performance that are coming into a public space, a public park, our population of artists and our population of staff are separate and working with different procedures. So we are making sure that along with whatever our partnership institution or organization expects of their space is aligned with ours. And then with the Delacorte, which I had been talking about before, it's very, very new. So we are learning about what that space looks like for all, even though it's historic, there are still new things that we are learning about how people sort of interact with the space. But we are in the process of defining what is public and private there as well. And we are aware, I think the thing that we are very schooled in and have made a business of is dealing with incidents in these public spaces, such as a park, as incidents. So we are trained to manage situations that may arise or some sort of oversight. We have kind of an emergency procedural committee and group that deals with that all the time. So we're always heavily staffed to manage those things. We certainly have had things happen in the park, both inside the theaters and outside in the park, that are emergency situations that have required intervention either from the city or from police, from the city, from other elements, any kind of security, our own or another private groups. So we are following those very standardized procedures when it comes to managing what we know may be something that is specifically related to an ice visitation in the park. But we are treating it as one of our generalized incidents that we have been training for, and that we are staffed correctly to respond to. That means that there are both junior and senior staff in the park that can be tapped if there is a need for some kind of intervention. And we also have resources available to us on call, so that we can analyze a situation and make an appropriate call to get additional help if necessary.
I think that's really interesting, Sarah, the way you're framing that, because what makes this topic kind of complex is the degree to which, on one hand, preparing for this isn't that different than preparing for a power outage or a lightning strike or a fire. But there's also some ways that it's really different. And I think that's part of the feeling of risk, the feeling of confusion. Obviously, it feels like a different kind of moment than a power outage, for example. Maybe not, but I mean, it does in some ways. So I think that's part of what is really crucial as we move forward through the hour, to start kind of picking apart where are the differences between this and, a fire. Bruce, your practice spans employment law and immigration law, and broadly speaking, and we'll get into the details of this over the next hour, what are the main elements that go into a venue making a plan? I'm asking you this because I've read the plan that you created for City Center, and I thought, well, that pretty much sums it up very clearly. So if you could kind of give the overview of what the pieces of that plan were.
Okay, I'll be happy to do so. Short description. I wish I could say it was middle age, but I think I'm a little beyond the middle age. Brown curly hair, glasses with a gray shirt on today, and no tie. Even though traditionally lawyers are going to wear ties in presentations, I decided this audience probably didn't care if I wore a tie or not. So Julie did an incredible job of describing what was put together. So the plan, you have to have the plan in advance so that who is to, who's the point person that can needs to be there. You don't want the frontline employee necessarily having to deal with ICE agents. I like to say, you might find 5 ICE agents in tactical gear, with their rifles over their shoulder. If you don't have a plan in advance, you're going to be fairly intimidated by that situation, and that's quite frankly what they're trying for. They try for 2 things: intimidation and shock and awe. And if you don't have a plan, you're going to give into that, say, on an administrative warrant, because that's where you have the most discretion. And I think it's probably the more likely of the 3 particular events that encounters that you would have, is that ICE would be coming in looking for someone. They have an administrative warrant for them. They could be also on what we call a knock and talk. They don't have a warrant. They're just trying to kind of use they're pressuring you into allowing them to locate somebody that they are. So you need to, when you're on that administrative warrant, you need to make sure you get a chance to see it. You get a copy of it. Who are they looking for? They may have their information totally wrong. On the other hand, they may be absolutely right, but within the plan, it will be decided whether or not you're going to give consent to locate that employee and bring them to wherever, to an office or wherever, or you're not going to give consent and just say, I appreciate you coming here and looking for Juan Hernandez, and I know you have a job to do, but we're not going to cooperate. So have a nice day. And they can leave. And I would say most of my nonprofit clients are all taking that position. They're not taking I call it the Dollar General position, where Dollar General literally announced that, if ICE comes into the facility, into their store, they're going to call that employee up front but we're going to force them to go outside to talk to them. And the only thing ICE ever talks to them about is put your hands behind your back. So the Dollar General went one step farther. They would even call out a customer. If they know their customers in the store, they'd bring them up front. So that's totally the other end of it. The scariest is a raid, but the reality of what it takes to get a raid, it takes showing probable cause to a federal judge that there are criminal violations taking place involving the employer and the employees. That's a fairly high standard. And so you probably are not going to see a raid. Now, you may think everywhere has been raided. You may think the DC restaurants were raided back in April. 102 restaurants. Media call them raids. None of them were raids. They were all notices of inspection. LA, probably some were raids. Some probably were administrative warrants. A few were notices of inspection. Again, they use the term raid. It's better for their ratings or, reading an article, whatnot. A notice of inspection would be, I would say, the second most common of the behind the administrative warrant, but there's not a lot of action per se on that one. At least on the old way, they come in with two special agents. They'd give you the notice of inspection subpoena. They ask if you have any questions. No, please don't have any questions because all the questions you have are for your lawyer, not for them. And they say, okay, great. Well, we expect the I-9s and 3 business days, see you. Now, I will say today, they have been a little more confrontational. They've been known to wear tactical gear into facilities, whether it's a restaurant or a theater or whatnot. Again, I think it's mainly for intimidation purposes. And they have been known to come in and swarm particular employers, so that if anybody runs when the word ICE is said, and unfortunately I've had a client that had this problem. They ran out of a kitchen, and guess what? Out the back door, but they were covering the back door because they had come in more than just the two people you could see. So, but if you don't have that plan of action, you're not going to know what to do. I literally talked to a client this morning, and they were talking about a visa issue, but I'm like, okay, let's just spend a couple minutes seeing if you're prepared, or at least have some discussions about being prepared if ICE shows up. They weren't particularly wanting to have that discussion, and eventually told me, well, if they do show up, we'll just give them whatever they want. And I'm like, okay, that's exactly why I would love to do some training, Zoom training, or they were fairly local, even in person, and certainly plan of action, so that is not done. We'll just give them whatever they want. That, quite frankly, it kind of, it's sent shivers through my spine. It's like, oh, wow. I haven't had many dealings with this client. I hope I can get the opportunity to educate them. Some clients want to be. I think the arts community as a whole has been very, very welcoming of wanting to know what they can do. They're worried for their staff. They're worried for their customers. Everything. When Julie was going through the what's public and what's not, I was thinking of one scenario where she's, good point. You gotta have a ticket to get into the theater. Therefore, it's not public because not everybody has a ticket. What about if you're doing a free performance. And I don't know whether that's something that I'm not in New York. I'm not actually in San Francisco either. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. But we have a lot of performances here. So what if it's free? And so you don't actually get a ticket, you just allow people in, and maybe it's a, three-piece ensemble that's, that's playing whatever. I know I go to the symphony and they often have some like chamber music, and it's free. Um, would that change the scenario? Uh, what if it's free, but you have to have a ticket to get into? Would that change? That would make it very much like a paying customer. But if it's no ticket, I don't know the answer to that. But these are all questions that need to be thought out beforehand, not afterwards. And like I say, ICE wants to use their intimidation and the shock and awe. That's why they don't wear masks, because they're afraid they're going to be identified, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. They're doing it for shock and awe, the same way, they wear tactical gear into a small restaurant where there's not going to be, any kind of, fight back. They just do it flat out for intimidation. And I will not be surprised if they would do that at a theater. And maybe they do find the one person, maybe they don't. But if anybody saw them there, they might think twice as a customer. Well, you know what? I don't really want to go back there because I don't feel comfortable. My my brother is undocumented, and I sometimes go to the theater with him. I'm not going to go to the theater with him if I think ICE is going to be around.
Sure. Bruce, that makes a lot of sense. I think that question about, if for an unticketed event, or certainly talking about, with Sarah about the idea of public performances that are happening in parks that anybody could just walk up to. But I think that part of the risk assessment is, you were talking primarily about employees.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that a lot of venue managers are concerned about is the audience. And
Sure.
that's something I'd like to turn to you, Rex, and ask about. Like, we're going into a lot of the details about what Bruce is talking about here. But first, I've got a question for you, Rex, which is, so far, we have not, to my knowledge, we've not seen a significant amount of immigration enforcement happening in live performance venues in the US. Traditionally, it was the last place that ICE would want to do an enforcement, because they were concerned that they'd be outnumbered, frankly, and that they would cause a riot, and that's the last thing they'd want to do. Many venues are understandably very worried about this, but some people feel like it's unlikely that ICE would target live performing arts venues, or certainly the audiences in live events. From your work at Latino Justice, you're definitely in the trenches of responding to ICE activities. What do you think is the most likely case scenario, or likely scenario for enforcement within the sort of the world of performing arts venues? And what do you think are the most important possibilities performance venues should be preparing for? Is your perspective on this any different than Bruce's?
Thanks, Matthew. My name is Rex Chen. My pronouns are he, him. I'm based in New York City. To describe myself, I'm Taiwanese American, middle-aged man with straight black hair, thin. I'm wearing a red short sleeve shirt and a headset. So, Matthew, your question here is about my guess and forecast for what to be prepared for in the future. I'm not saying that these are already happening. I'm trying to target what may come and what's good to plan for. I think one reason ICE might visit in the future is live arts venues is to intimidate the public. And for that, I think just going during the daytime when no audience member is there is going to intimidate people about, well, is it safe to go there for an evening concert considering they were just there the other day? So that would be the standard trainings for them just stopping by during business hours and setting out what to tell them, and that we won't cooperate if we're not required to, or we'll just not answer you until a supervisor or general counsel comes here and just stops them until someone more senior comes onto the scene. A second of three possibilities I can think of is, as Bruce mentioned, going to a place and not having a warrant and having no legal authority to investigate anything. But they're just going to go anyway, I predict in the future, just to see if staff say, oh, sure, come on in. Everyone can come on in. And they don't have to, but if they decide to do that, or even worse, we've seen from home raids, they might try to trick people into letting them in and saying, oh, I think someone's on your roof. Can I just come on in and look through your building to see if there's some person on the roof and trick staff to let them in? We see that in home raids over the years many times. And then Bruce mentioned that not seeing many of these swarming raids at live arts venues, period, so far. But I will say to be prepared for it. What if they use the same old tired illegal tactics they use in home raids, and they use their same old playbook and they start using it at live arts venues? They might actually be eager to arrest people when they're not legally allowed to and just break the law. And we've seen that in home raids. It's as if racking up more arrests will somehow make them look good, even if they're illegal arrests, as if they have a quota or something that they're trying to hit. So I think for things to do to be prepared, some of the standard training you've been talking about. I also think to really give staff a little help and let them know, what if in the intimidating situations you slip up? How do you try to recover and say, no, I no longer give you permission and you should leave? Not just hold the line in the beginning, but what if there's a slip? How can we try to recover as much as possible?
While Rex was talking, I thought of one situation that has taken place concerning the live venue, and it was L.A. Dodger Stadium, and I'm not sure maybe it's Dodger Stadium is the name, but ICE was using the parking lot. I believe, like they said that it really wasn't Dodgers parking lot or something. There was a little dispute, but they were there during the day. They were not there at the time of a Dodgers game. But using Rex's analogy, well, there could be 40,000 fans there at Dodger Stadium that night. And and it made the news here in Nashville, so I'm sure it made the news in LA. Are there a few folks, that were going to be paying customers that said, you know what? I don't want to see the Dodgers if I got to see ICE. Not going. And, again, Rex and I think are totally aligned. Intimidation. And that's what they're going for.
Sure. We're
And
talking a lot. Oh, yeah. Go ahead,
I
Ed.
just say, and also nice about that Los Angeles Dodger situation is the importance of PR after it happened, where they refused to let people in, and then they let the communities know
Yes. That's right.
we did not let them in. So that's useful as a.
Great point.
Yeah. And I think that comes to some of the topics we're going to be getting later, which talk about like the broader fabric that our venues exist within communities. One quick question I wanted to ask. We're talking about audiences, um, we're talking about staff, but also just to be really clear, because I've had people ask me this all the time. Artists who are international artists who are performing at a venue. Bruce, I'm going to ask this one to you so we can get the answer I already know is the answer. But do we need 9-9 for an artist who's performing a one performance or a short series of performances at our venues?
I mean, you'd have to look at the test of what's an independent contractor. I mean, if you're doing one performance,
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to be seen as an employee.
Right.
They don't have much direction over you. You're going to be doing whatever is set, either if you're playing an instrument or singing or in a play. Now, if you are in, a Broadway play, and I know some of the Broadway plays have gone on for years and years, then that can be different. And they probably would be viewed as employees of the Broadway theater.
Right.
But a one-off like that, most likely you're going to be an independent contractor. However, that does not preclude ICE from going after you. Because you could, maybe you're an independent contractor, or maybe you just do these one-offs because you know you don't have legal status. You cannot fill out, legally fill out an I-9 with, proper documentation. And so you do this. So that doesn't give you any protection per se, for ICE. I mean, they can still issue that administrative warrant, or, the knock and talk, or, whatever. So if you're thinking, well, if they're an independent contractor, they can't come get me. That's not going to be a defense when they cuff you and they
When they
say,
come and get you, right? Exactly.
you don't have legal standing to be here in the United States, and they say, well, I'm working at this play tonight. Yeah, okay, well, you won't be working here anymore.
And then the same thing is also, I mean, even if an artist does have a proper O or P visa and they've got it in their passports, but if they're asked for it, they're going to need that documentation on them, because just because they're in legal status doesn't mean they can't be
Right. That's one of the scary parts, that, if you are being asked about your status, you shows that you're authorized to be in the United States. How many people actually carry anything that would reflect that?
Right.
I don't think I do. Now, I guess if I kept my global entry card, but I don't carry that. I don't think anybody carries their Social Security card anymore. Maybe 30 years ago you did. So I think, especially unfortunately, if you're brown skin, you probably need to start thinking about carrying something that will show that you have authorization to be in the United States.
I got a question for you. This is a hard question. Especially given that our audiences today are from, the attendees here at this webinar from all over the US. But I'm going to ask you the question. Are local police allies in keeping our venues, our staff, and our audiences and our artists safe? Many venues have good relationships with local police. Many of them work very closely together for crowd control and this kind of thing. Does a venue's relationship with local police impact how they manage an enforcement situation? How can a venue best position itself in relation to local law enforcement in anticipation of a potential ICE enforcement?
Well, many cities believe that public safety is improved and is increased if local police are not cooperating with ICE and immigration enforcement. And in a number of cities, not just the political leaders, but the police also strongly agree. So I think it's useful to build relationships with the local police and to remind them and explore with them their commitment that if they're focused on public safety, they should not just be reporting everything to immigration enforcement. This will allow immigrants to report things they see and to get help from the police, and that makes everyone safer. And so I think talking to them, and also police have discretion, not just that they must do everything this way or that way. And that's where working with them can give you, I think, a bit of a leg up in a situation, though it is not always going to be a perfect defense. It's better.
Thank you for that. Sarah, I've got a question for you. One really good question we received from an attendee was this. It feels like there's a lot riding on the responsibility of staff, especially very junior staff, who may be the ones to first encounter an ICE agent or a situation like this. Are they really the ones who should be put in that position? What kind of conversation should we have with staff? And what if a staff member is not up to handling this task? I mean, this is very reasonable. Like if it's door security, it's ushers, it's box office staff who are probably going to be the ones to first encounter in the situation where ICE shows up. That's a lot to ask. How did you have those? What conversations did you have with your staff about that?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's one that came up absolutely immediately this year while we were having these conversations as our different projects and productions went out to rehearse. So agreed. Junior staff cannot be left out there wherever there is to manage these situations. So we did two things. One is sort of a phone tree it's not really a phone tree, but the idea of having a designated group of senior leaders that are available whenever we have an outdoor performance, that can be reached out to at any time. And we have various ways that we're getting in touch. We have our internal channels, we have external channels. We will have somebody there who is considered the most senior person, the leader on staff. So we will staff it correctly so that people can be reached quickly to get the resources that we need and to inform others what's going on in the park, and nobody is left alone in a situation. So that's the important thing, is that there's a designated committee. I'm on it. Our director of operations is on it. We'll tell our executive director quickly, but that's not the first line of defense. It's really people who are involved in the infrastructure of the buildings and the projects, the infrastructure for the projects as well. So that's the case. And then we also have beefed up our on the ground staffing as well. So yeah, we do have junior staff there, but there will never be a time where we don't have a manager who has been dealing with outdoor incidents for years. And again, it gets back to what you were saying before, Matt, I think, is that there's a kind of a baseline safety and compliance that we are used to and that we feel like we're well trained in. And then there's that additional level of, well, we're in a situation that has political meaning to some, that has ethical and moral meaning to some. That level of it, we have made it very clear to our staff that that's not their intent at the moment in these spaces. They aren't there to make sure that the bigger questions are being answered. They're there to make sure that everyone around them is safe and that they get the right resources and the right people in place at the time that it's needed. We will always have, if there's one senior person on the ground, but a number of, I get a phone call and I'm in Queens, I'm coming out to wherever we're going, and it won't be immediate, but I'll be helpful in sort of managing the aftermath of anything that's happened. So I think that is the training that we went through, is that it's kind of when I say do no harm, I mean, make sure everyone is not in the way of harm. No junior person should feel like they are tasked with doing something that could put them in any kind of harm's way. And you can define harm in whatever way that you mean. And they should make sure that they feel well staffed and well supported by our group around us. So far, I mean, I will say we haven't had one of what we would call one of these incidents happen during our mobile unit, or we've been open for a week with Shakespeare in the Park. Hasn't happened there either. So we haven't played this out yet, but I think that everyone understands who they're supposed to turn to and what their sort of sphere of, what are their limitations to their sphere of influence. And I feel like we have those conversations very, very regularly. We have a touch point at the beginning of the day and the end of the day that kind of go over the operational issues that have occurred. We have notes that we send out that indicate any, when I say abnormalities, I mean, there's regular run of show and there's the irregular run of show. And we make sure that we're in discussion about all of them. So I do think that there's a lot of points of channels of abilities there, and that I would be surprised if anyone going into it feels like they're supposed to do something. Of course, in the moment, things play out differently, and we want to make sure that we're staffed well to help then in what we would consider an emergency situation.
Yeah, thank you. Julie, that's something that kind of came out to me in looking at your plans and the protocols and the trainings that you and Bruce put together for your staff, was that sense of like that first run, that first group of people that are likely to be closest to that public area are the ones who are principally being trained to say, hang on a second, I gotta make a phone call. That's pretty much what it's about. Just making sure they know who to call. And you're not asking them to know necessarily the difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. That's not an usher's job. An usher's job is just say, hold on here a second, I'm going to get my boss. And I think that's really important. Is there anything you want to add to that, Julie? I think because it came out pretty clearly in your materials.
That's absolutely it. All and everything that Sarah was saying is very similar to what we've put in place as well. It really comes down to training. And luckily, City Center, we're fortunate enough that our director of venue operations, Nadine Love, she's a former school teacher. So she was great at kind of helping us lead the charge in figuring out how to drill our staff. We started with very detailed procedures. If anything, it helped us think through the well, what if that happens? Well, what if this happens? Those different types of scenarios. And we created ICE procedure binders for all the staff involved. We established who the main point of contact should be when ICE arrived, exactly to that point where we don't want junior staff. We want senior staff, leaders of the organization really interceding there. And we had backup individuals as well. So we gave clear instructions to our security teams, our front of house teams, what they should do should ICE arrive. And we did specific trainings with those ICE point people, our CFO being the first line of defense, with myself, our controller, and our directors of facilities and venue ops as backups. We made one-sheeters so that in the crisis, if with ICE standing right there in front of you, you had a quick reference guide of the do's and don'ts. And we also did specific training with our security staff to talk through and educate them at first to get them comfortable with their role of essentially saying, I'm going to get someone who is authorized to speak to you, and that you do not have authority to pass this public lobby, and they are to make copies of all the documentation and collect contact information. We then drilled both groups together with all of our front desk security guards, as well as the staff members, the points of contact, and we had a staff member pretend to be ICE. We're theater, so might as well leverage our acting chops. And we didn't tell anyone on the team what documents ICE would be coming with, or who on the phone tree the point people would be calling. And during those trainings, we also workshopped, how to issue a warning to our staff and tenants that ICE was in the building through our emergency notification system and our internal walkie-talkie communication. And we also, made that choice that for both scenarios one and two, the notice of inspection or the admin warrant, that we would alert the building of ICE's presence. But if ICE had that judicial warrant where we are legally obligated to, allow them access to the spaces on the warrant, we wouldn't alert the building because we don't want to be seen as as obstruction of justice. And so all of these scenarios are very different. It can be very confusing when you're in a high stress situation. So we drilled this for hours over multiple days, over, multiple sessions. Similarly, we created a crisis response team, which included the point people, our CEO, our VP of marketing, our director of communications, and of course, Bruce. Created an email distribution list that included all of those folks. So should ICE arrive, we had an easy way to communicate. And beyond that core group, we had to also train those frontline staff members who interact with the public. And we made sure to educate them on what their role was, which is what we've all been saying, which is to simply direct them to security, not through our building, but they might have to go around the block to get to that desk, but that's what we want them to do. And that they, again, reiterating that they don't have the authority to speak with ICE. They do not have the authority to consent to them coming in the building. And we wanted anywhere from our cleaning staff to our ushers to our development staff, everyone to know what their role was should ICE come. And then finally, what we did is we also conducted our own I-9 audit. And this was illuminating to us as well, because we realized we have some very old paperwork from employees and some somewhat illegible documents. And so our finance team also worked with hiring managers to train them on the proper way to fill out I-9 forms and asked for certain employees maybe to complete forms again. And this was a big shift. I'm sure we're all in a position where we have new hires, whether it's artists, crew, administrators, possibly on a weekly basis. But we gave the context as to why we were doing this so that our staff could better understand why it was so important that they capture this information accurately and legibly. So it really came down to training and drills for us.
That's amazing detail. Thank you so much for that, Julie. I want to pivot a little bit, and this is a question for Rex and Sarah. Most of this conversation has been about the nitty-gritty of venue operations, but venues all exist within communities. And so I guess the question I want to ask is, how can venues, through their programming, their promotion, their public outreach, address the fears and the needs of those who are at risk in their communities? I'm interested in hearing from both of you your perspective on this topic. I guess the two perspectives I would be is, Rex, you are very connected to those communities. And what do you see coming from performing arts or cultural spaces that feels like what your communities need? And Sarah, in the work that the public does, which is very public oriented, obviously, what do you see as the priorities for how to reach out to at-risk communities? Sarah, why don't you start?
Well, okay, Sarah, you start.
Rex, go for it. Go for it, Rex.
Okay.
Rex, go ahead first, actually.
A few quick points is that I do think that it doesn't make sense to be extremely public that you're prepared. It's just not something that people are issuing a press release to say, good news, we're prepared. But I think that when you do put rules in place and you might put markings out there saying, okay, private space beyond this point, you need permission to go beyond here. I think people will see these things and they'll say, okay, it looks like you're organized and you have a plan. And then I think not going out of your way to assist immigration, again, not something you can get a plaque to say when people enter. And that example that Bruce shared of the Dodgers saying, we're not going to go out of our way to let them use our parking lot. I think those are some things that you can do, and maybe just informally, off the record, reaching out and saying that you are taking some steps, but nothing too public about it. It's just not really suitable for a public announcement.
Rex, I really appreciate your framing of that, and I had a feeling that's where you're going to go with it. So yeah, I mean, look, the work that the public theater does in terms of connecting with communities and bringing them into theatrical spaces, both as artists and as audiences, is our mission. That's who we are, and we are there for discussion and questions, and to be welcoming, and to be a resource, and to be, protective in so many ways. But this is one situation where what we need to do is highlight the markers that you're talking about, but yet also, not put anybody in a situation where more harm can be done. So yes, we have signage around the building about the public and private aspects of our lobby that I talked about. We also, as soon as they were available, we had the cards listed in many, many languages for a list of rights of anybody who is experiencing any of these stressors, whether in our space or outside of our space. I think a lot of the work that we do, the artistic work that we do, talks about the situation that we are in, whether we find ways to bring it into our artistic work all the time. And especially in something like Mobile Unit, when we're going out into communities where people want to connect on what it means to be part of the world at this time. So we're highlighting those aspects of it. But I also think that we need to be aware of our sort of organizational stability while we do this, and make sure that we are, we're sort of able to get to the next day. So we aren't helping immigration in these spaces, but we are also making sure that we are compliant where necessary, and we are making sure that we are, yes, well prepared. I think that's the way to put it. I will add one more piece to this that I think is completely compliant with any of the situations, but we have stressed with our staff that if we find ourselves, especially in an outdoor situation where something is happening, that we endorse the documentation of what's going on. Inside of our spaces, that would be, maybe something would be written or HR would come in and take notes or something like that. But outdoors, it's, bring your phones out. And I am endorsing, I guess, saying that, that is something that we know our audiences are going to do. We want to make sure if somebody comes in with a warrant that we take a picture of the information that's being shown us and send it to the people who can interpret it correctly. So that's an element of this that I think is an important supportive system that we can put in both our internal and our external spaces to let people know that we are looking at all angles of this and that we are aware of the place that we hold in the midst of an incident occurring, and so that they can see us as, sort of well organized, understanding of what we need to do, and a resource to the community around us at that time.
I wonder if some arts venues at times do community events like a street fair. Consider if you decide to see if someone would do a Know Your Rights session, which is perfectly legitimate and legal, that would give a signal to the community that we are concerned.
Thank you both for that, for both of those. I think that's really useful. And I think it's also for venues that do their own programming, it's challenging right now because I think, I've spoken with presenters who are saying, like, I really want to be doing programming that speaks specifically to at-risk communities, but on the other hand, I don't want to create a situation where I put the attendees specifically at risk. And that seems like a challenge. And I think part of what's coming out of this conversation today is that the community outreach of speaking to those communities is really important. And the actual specific risks of a raid going after audience members seems not necessarily in the front of mind of most of the panelists here. And I think that's an important realization about like how to parse the perception of risk as a presenter. And I think the importance of reaching out to those communities and showing in whatever ways possible the kind of support that you two are both talking about. Can I just do a lightning round? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you really feel like we should have touched on? Is there anything that I didn't bring up that you wanted to get said today?
I think we lightly touched on it, but the idea that this is really, it first starts with building security and your security protocols, and that you then, like many of our, emergency action procedures, you have to tailor the specific need or incident or issue back to unique and special circumstances. So I think that this is really folding this kind of work into probably your already existing emergency action plans.
Three really quick points. When I train people about what if your staff member in ICE comes, I actually recommend telling them to take a breath before they take action because it's going to be so stressful. Take a moment to breathe. And second is to tell staff, you should not physically intervene. If ICE wants to do illegally, go through to the private places, do not get in there and block them physically. I don't want any of my staff getting shot. And then a different point is what might be happening in the future. We can't really change our plans based on ICE's unfair tactics. They might actually be illegally targeting places that have Latino audiences, Latino events, or Latino restaurants, but you shouldn't change what your programming is. The key is to really convince the public that these illegal raids are not the answer. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for your wisdom. This went real deep and I really appreciate it. I would love to, I guess we're pretty much out of time, so I'd like to hand it over to Lisa and Kendall from APAP and from NIVA to wrap us up. Well, one last comment is that Tamizdat is preparing a brief best practices guide based on the research and the contributions of the panelists that we will be publishing in the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that. Lisa, Kendall, take it away.
Thanks so much. My name is Kendall Gilvar. I'm the National Independent Venue Association Strategic Communications Manager. I'm a young woman with fair skin, long dark hair, and a beige sweater, and I use she, her pronouns. On behalf of NIVA and our members, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. We truly appreciate the updates on the artist visa process and the guidance on making a real plan with all of these evolving immigration policies. And I will throw it over to Lisa. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kendall, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to my staff. Thank you, Willie, outstanding job. Thank you, Matthew, fantastic as always. Really good to see our members, Sarah and Julie on the line. Speaking of your experiences, very, very important. Of course, we're going to do what we need to do. We love our people, right? Our audiences are the lifeblood of the theaters and dance halls and every concert hall that we manage. And as institutional leaders, that's our obligation. We love our people, and our venues are the lifeblood of our cities, our towns. And so we're going to do what we have to do to protect them. But it's not just preparedness. Preparedness is not just a policy, it's stewardship. And when we steward, we ensure that the artists that we invite, that the stories that they tell are all amplified so that communities all around the world have the opportunity to experience what it is that we value and what it is that our world values. And this has been such a very rich conversation. It's probably just the beginning. And I want to encourage everyone to stay close to one another. If you need advice or if you need support, I know Matthew and Tamizdat is available, as is our team, to support you in directing you to people who can help. So stay encouraged, stay lifted. We have work to do, and our work is never needed more now than before. Thank you for being here.